once I give a quick intro. Okay, we seem to be live. Here we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, allenwyma, and today I'm with Remi Rousselet. I hope I say that correctly. We were chatting about that before the show. And he is a software engineer, and you may know him best for Riverpod, provider. And I believe you also did Freeze too, which I thoroughly enjoy. It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite tools. Why don't I go ahead and turn the mic over to you? You can go ahead and maybe give a quick self-intro.
I'm happy to be here. Um, as you mentioned, I've made provider about Flutter, which is a board of with them. In general, I like to main packages, which we do too at Invertase, and yeah, like at Invertase we are making packages and all those things. Next start.
Sorry, you said you're making Firebase packages. Did I hear that correctly?
At Invertase, the Firefighter ecosystem, Firebase package.
Package. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I thought the Firebase package was maintained by the Flutter team.
We are in partnership with them.
Oh, okay. So which part were you actually working on native code also then yourself? Or you just writing the Dart side, or what were you specifically doing on there?
We maintain the plugin, so if we have to write native code too, yeah. We do both in native and Dart side, like fixing bugs.
Actually, I recently saw somebody posting about Flutter Fire Desktop or something. Have you seen this? I guess because there's no
Yes.
like native Linux support, right? So is this actually in the works to actually put something native in for the other platforms, or am I missing
Yeah,
something?
that's actually a colleague of mine who's working on implementation of Flutter Fire for desktop support.
Oh, it's a colleague of yours. Are they? I think I saw
Yeah.
they're in Pakistan or something like that. Oh, okay. So you have a complete remote team then.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. We're
Oh, that's
like
cool.
6 or 7 people, something like that.
Only 6 or 7. Wow, so small team. Like, you guys are doing what exactly? So, I mean, I know you're working on obviously on this plugin, but what else you're doing? Obviously, client projects, right?
We are mostly on open source things, which are source for open source projects. Also have our own open sources projects like Melos and other. I think it was about like Spec, which is coming soon, which is a testing utility.
Actually, that's kind of interesting. There's Flutter testing is interesting because it's kind of like a first class citizen, but it's also yeah, I don't know. There's also plugins for it too. I don't know. I mean, I guess most people just work for the native stuff, right? People don't usually add things into their Flutter testing necessarily. But do you think that the current Flutter stack needs more work to it? I mean, are you planning to just keep this separate? Or are you gonna try to actually merge it to the main line?
It's mostly about developer experience that we're working. What we're working on is adding things like watch mode for the command line, the ability to run only filing tests, improve the developer experience.
Okay, improve the experience. Okay.
Yeah.
But this isn't released yet, right?
It's work in progress. By the end of the month, but it's not quite sure yet. Yeah, spec.
Oh, SPEC, right?
Yeah.
Is this similar to like RSpec in this kind of utilities? spec. Usually I see this word with like in Ruby, there's this tool called rspec where you do BDD. So I was curious if it's going to be similar to that.
No, it's unrelated. No, it has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start. Like I said, I was kind of praising you before the show, and maybe I should start praising you during the show. You're just a man that's really understands Dart and Flutter more than most people. Like, what actually kind of got you into Flutter and Dart, anyways? Where'd you actually start from?
It's actually a fun story. Well, it depends on perspective. Actually, I used to be a web developer, working for typical business applications, marketing applications, and so and but I rapidly got bored. Well, not quite bored. More about we had issues with in the product I was working on. Just maintaining the product. So mostly, including me, I was very junior at the time. So we were looking at better practices. So I was making my research too. So I cut Dart, and I suggested TypeScript, which is ended up using because Dart is not quite usable for the project we were working on. We migrating for that project to Dart, but I found Dart interesting, so I went ahead and tried on my free time. And then I discovered that Dart somehow has this mobile or called Flutter onto the Dart website. So I started doing some simple mobile. So I tried Flutter, and then I realized that this developer experience is a huge improvement over what I've been like. Simply just installing and creating a project is so much easier in Flutter. You have almost nothing to do compared to in JavaScript where you have to install TypeScript. So it's better nowadays, but it used to be very, very difficult. Sometimes it could take many days. And so I realized, yeah, Flutter has such a great tooling, very easy to and dig around. Like one of the things I really love too in the Dart ecosystem is when you're installing a package and you do go to definition in your IDE code, including if you're doing that for Flutter. It's not anything you can with all the comments and all, which makes learning package or technically so much simpler. To learn React, you have to open your Git repository or clone it. But with Flutter, you can open it directly. You can it still works. So it made me because it's so easy to try. And like I figure out that like one of my colleagues at the time was using Stack Overflow, and he was very happy about his account. He said like I have 1,000 points. Wow. So I found it quite interesting. To try and make an account too. And so Flutter questions, because at the time that was the technology I was looking at. And I tried to answer random Flutter questions just to be curious. And I realized that I could learn a lot by trying to answer questions on Stack Overflow. So I got kind of like too much into it, and I answered questions all the questions on Stack Overflow. And I did that for like 2 years straight, and at some point I rapidly grew in experience thanks to that. And yeah, that's my journey basically.
I would have never thought about answering questions, but for sure that is it's a great way to learn because yeah, if you don't know, you have to learn it yourself.
Yeah,
So then you
basically.
must have a massive reputation on Stack Overflow then.
Yeah, nearly 200,000 points.
I'm afraid to look at mine. I'm sure mine is maybe sub 100 for sure. Maybe sub 50 probably. I'm usually on the other side. Actually, usually I'm looking for things rather than asking. So I'm happy that I'm not the one always asking. You're not one of the Stack Overflow trolls, are you? I always hear about those recently.
I mean, I guess it depends on Flutter.
I'm not too sure, but usually I hear a lot of people saying like they ask a question and then like the guy comes back and just say, "Oh, you're shouldn't ask stupid questions," and then just kind of close the question or something. I think I can't remember what people were talking about, something like that.
Mm.
But
I haven't seen that many people do that uh, kind of moderated. I know somehow people dislike downvotes a lot because it's this downvote system. Um, but I think like I understand why people get frustrated, but I think that's an important part of why Stack Overflow is successful. Because if you can't stand, it's a lot harder for uh, this this question or this answer is better question and answer. So it would degrade the quality when you call a question and you get the first link. Uh, it should point to the correct answer, not the random. Um, so I get where people get negative feedback is never too cool but I think it's really people tend to think that there is necessary negative feedback when I think from experience. It's because when people first ask their first, they don't really know how to ask a good question, and so of course it would be of a lower time, so you would get more negative feedback than already. Understanding the good practices is fine, I think.
I see questions like, "I want to write Flutter apps. What language should I use?" I don't know how to answer this kind of question because that's if this is the kind of question you're gonna ask, then I think I'm a little bit difficult for me to help you. I think we're at different levels. I don't. I think even you were like, I don't know how to answer that.
Leave a comment on the question. Say, I mean, answering this is quite straightforward, right? Use die because there's only dark and end of the story. Or if there's an already existing question for that, maybe close that as duplicate. But like there's no need to spend that much time on such question.
More respectful than me, I think. So I should probably learn from you.
I don't know. I don't know how you behave.
Usually that depends on my mood, but I think this kind of question, I think, yeah. Actually, I just avoid answering it because I don't know. I feel
That's
like
the
if you're
best
gonna ask
approach.
this kind of if you're gonna ask this kind of question, I don't know if I can help you because this is something you should be able to find for yourself. But I understand
Yeah.
like there's a lot of people who always say, okay, I really want to learn how to program, but then you ask them, okay, so what have you done so far? And they're like, I just really want to learn. I'm like, well, did you read? Did you watch video? No, no, no. I just want to learn someday. Like, okay, I don't know where to help you from there. You got to make an action, right? Or else it's difficult for me to help you, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry. So that's pretty interesting way to go, right? So it makes sense. I think a lot of people who are in Flutter definitely come from web because it's, yeah, I'm not too sure why it is, but maybe it's because it's very related, especially if you know Flexbox. You can work yourself around most of the alignments of widgets and things like that. Um,
I think
mhm.
it's at least for me. I think it's because the way Flutter works is familiar for web developers. Like in web development, Vue and Angular, which are very close to what we do with Flutter. with widgets. That are basically React components. It's almost a one-to-one port with like slightly different namings for life cycles, but that's about it. So I think it plays a big role in having web dev use Flutter. Same thing for like Dart is very close to JavaScript. It has a lot of pub is similar to npm, and something web dev are familiar with.
Me though, I'm probably the strangest web developer because I try to use as little JavaScript as I can, and I stay far away from React. To give you an idea about why, I was in a project where 200 rows in a table took, I think it was, I forgot how long it was. It was like at least 30 seconds to render. And so ever since I had that project, I've stayed clear of React because it's too easy to hurt yourself if you don't know what you're
I
doing.
don't quite agree. Actually, I feel like it's harder to hurt yourself. But I mean, of course, like bad code will always code. But I think from experience, it's harder with React because of how lifecycle works. Like, it's just hard to say like that. I think you would have a much harder time roll JavaScript because you can do a lot worse things than with React. React forces you to structure your code.
I don't know. I've never been a part of any project that took 30 seconds for 200 rows in a table.
You would be
Okay,
surprised. I've seen some.
I'm not saying there is no others, but in my experience, and this is at a bank, and they were pushing React. They were like, "Yeah, React is great." I'm like, "Okay, I don't see it." But yeah, I mean, it depends on the people, right? Also, this project was like written by a guy who didn't really know React, which obviously that's what happens.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
probably
why,
the issue.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, he was using ref everywhere, and I never even heard of ref before. So, but yeah, I mean, for me, my whole thing is I try to stay far away from JavaScript as much as I can. I'm trying to use more server-side rendering and the SARs and stuff like that. But
Interesting.
Mhm.
I think I've full circle about JavaScript. I still don't quite. I'm still not fan about it, but I don't have this strong opinion that I used to have on JavaScript. Like JavaScript is horrible, whatever. I used to. Nowadays, now that I've used Dart and digged into low-level API, I kind of understand what JavaScript tries to do somewhere. I still think that it's a huge issue that typing in JavaScript. Like you don't cast this thing, it just doesn't work in TypeScript. Like if you cast something, it doesn't care that if the cast is not respected, which I think is a big problem. Which you wouldn't have if you used, say, ReasonML or Dart. There are many alternatives. But other than that, like I think that has a good set of features, especially around objects, quite neat in JavaScript. They allow you to do very flexible thing, like TypeScript, especially TypeScript. Can do really fancy stuff.
types, I'm really into Rust recently, and so I love the idea of having like these, like even from Haskell, like these maybe things. I think when I actually we were talking about this before, I use freeze. And I always make a like a result type. I copy off a Rust style with result type where it's either none or something. And I really love that a lot. So result of type T. It's fantastic. I wish they'd build that into Dart. I really wish Dart would have pattern matching and unions. Then I would be super happy with Dart. Right now I'm pretty happy with it, but I can wish for other things. Go ahead.
That's my number one request too. I really wish we had them too.
Do you know if is there a request for that? Do you know?
Language issue for it on the Dart / language repository. There you'll find all of them.
used pattern matching before?
Yes, I did.
It's the most fantastic thing I've ever used in my life. I just don't know why other languages just don't have it. I don't know. I don't know why.
I agree, but at the same time, I also agree that I think something I've been thinking for some time recently is I think a compiled language like Helm or Dart lacks are the ability to compile a language without fixing all the compilation errors. I think that would be neat if you could, like, in development only, of course, execute essentially a type error somewhere to make iterations easier. Because like pattern matching is neat, but on a really large project, if you want to add a new case to your union, you may have to change so many lines to start your program that it may take which is where we would be this feature would be interesting. Like you could change and test them individually instead of having to change everything at once.
Bad thing. I mean, I think it's fine to add another type and enforce all these changes, but at least I would much rather have a uncompilable code that I know won't run versus, and then
Oh
when I
yeah.
make it run, then I know it's going to work rather than like, oh, I want to just try it. Well, to be honest, like
Yeah,
every prototype I've ever done is always going to be put in production. Sorry, go ahead.
I agree. I just think that it's part of the reason why uh, not everyone likes it. Like I know that very beginners tend to dislike compilers. Are harder to understand. Like when you have a compilation error, the compilation error may make sense, but you have to understand the error message. Whereas if you can run the code, you can do console logs and things like that to see, yeah, the compiler is right. My variable is not what it's supposed to be. Of course, I cannot assign a string to a number. For people, there needs this console log to realize that's the case. Otherwise, message as they don't understand what's happening.
I see a lot of people posting on Facebook saying like, "How come my code doesn't work?" and how can and the reason it doesn't work because of null safety all of a sudden. And
Yeah.
then they also say, well, how can I turn off null safety? And it's like you have to try to explain to them, listen, null safety is great. Like you don't get it. You don't get all the problems of null values. And they just say, I don't care. I just want to get stuff working. Like no, yeah. I mean, I think I was there a long time ago, so I can sympathize. But yeah, I mean, okay. I mean, that's a good point. I never really thought about it like that. That it would be for people. It's a problem. And I think a lot of people in Flutter are still beginners, just beginner developers, or
Yeah.
even just beginner in Flutter. It's
Mhm.
so yeah, that's definitely a problem. But yeah, I still want that. I have to bug somebody. I could just figure out who the heck the person is I can bug to make this happen. That'd be great. Um, all right. I think let's kind of talk a little bit more. Let's get back on topic. I think we're kind of fanboying out about languages at the moment. Why don't we talk more about like, okay, so you did Stack Overflow for a few years, and then like, what was like your next kind of step in your Flutter journey? I mean, I'm sure you must have been creating projects at the same time, right?
Um, with my Stack Overflow journey, at some point I realized um, many questions were like many people have the same problem over and over and over. Um, and one idea that grew on me was maybe there is something we can do, like changing how the API works somehow, to kind of make it more intuitive for the users. Like one of the first thing I tried to do. That was when I already experienced. Um, is one of the common issues that people had with inherited widgets a few years ago when Flutter was still in alpha. Um, they created their but they didn't realize that they need to the mutable states that they pass to the inherited widget and pass it to your inherited widget. You need for widget to keep tracks of, to keep a reference. But people just created this change notifier instance directly inside their build method as a parameter to the inherited widgets. So of course, if the widget rebuilds or if you do a hot reload and everything, you lose your state, of course. But people just didn't know that. One of the thing I tried to do, that's how Provider came to be. The API for an inherited widget such that instead of taking the raw value as parameter, it instead takes a callback that creates and that dispose it for you, so that it's for you. So if you're using it, then aware of the problem, you won't face it. If you're seeing your change notifier inside the build method, you won't lose your state because you forgot to cache it. So it's not about boilerplate, it's more about making it more intuitive for people who don't know necessarily all the problems involved. Yes, that's how I got started on the open source package journey. And then as time passed, our and more experience, I found more problems to solve and search for new solutions and all that. So that's also how the hooks and Riverpod 2, which is Riverpod is also based provider did for inherited widgets, but instead Riverpod is doing that to provider and solving many problems with provider. That's typically how I work nowadays. I try to fix issues by making the API more intuitive.
Back, so I didn't quite understand the problem with inherited widget. You said you have to cache something. I didn't really know there's an issue with the state. I didn't think too much about the state. Like, isn't the inherited widget supposed to be a stateful widget so that way you won't lose your state?
No, it's not. It's actually a completely stateless widget. The only thing inherited widgets do is passing to their descendants a value. But this value can be anything. It's not caching it at all. It's just like, it's kind of a getter that bypass some widget. It's a getter that allows you to access some state in a constant way, like to avoid having to pass a value to every single constructor of all widgets in your widget tree, because that optimizes your builds and that like you could technically, if you're using the context API, visit all your ancestor widgets. I want to obtain some state somewhere, but then if your widget tree grows larger, the performance will decrease. Whereas with inherited widget, time it takes is constant for this. So that's great. But it does nothing else. It's not caching anything. It's not doing anything fancy. It's just to a value to the consumer.
But you're saying I didn't quite understand that what the issue was about the how you would actually lose state though. That was the part that really didn't get to me. Maybe I missed something somewhere.
It's really similar to Stream Builder. Like when people use Feature Builder and Stream Builder, they tend to create a new feature, create their feature builders. They do feature and then fetch past directly inside it. That whenever the widget rebuilds, then they triggered again. So the thing is, a widget may rebuild at any time. You shouldn't. The fact that the widget rebuilds shouldn't have any impact on your application. Like, it shouldn't cause bugs or cause performance issues. But the thing is, since people did those sort of things in their build method, like fetching and doing network requests or creating, for instance, then their application no longer respected the rules of the build method. So if a widget rebuilds too often, it had some negative consequences. So it made too many it recreated the state of something. So that's the issue people had.
All right, I didn't know this was a problem because I used Inherit widget in a project before, but I didn't experience any issues. Maybe I just somehow lucked out. But I
Yeah,
never
I mean,
used Inherit widget directly.
you can avoid it, especially if you're like you can miss the problem. Even if you have it, you may not necessarily realize it with inherited widgets because they tend to rebuild less often than with, say, feature provider, where feature provider is typically at the tip of the tree. So you see a lot faster than we inherited widgets. But that doesn't mean you don't have it. It may be that when you release your application in production, in a very specific case, when you're navigating from one page to another, then your widget will rebuild and you will lose your state. It's just you may not see it in development immediately.
Okay, so you made provider to kind of solve this issue. Like, what actually happened? That it seemed like somehow provider was like the package that Google was like, yeah, this is the one that, if you don't know what you want to use, this is the one that you should use. Like, I'm just curious about, do you know how this whole entire thing started? Was it what actually happened?
Um, what happened is around the Google I/O, Google worked on their package for something for simplifying inherited widgets. I think what they tried to do was also, focusing on simplifying inherited widgets, which the name their package provide instead of provider because taken. um, but when I saw this package, I was thinking that the API I had some issues with it. So what I did, making an issue, my issues with the package and about how I solved them with provider. Um, so we had some discussion around it. I really didn't necessarily want Google to say use provider. I wouldn't have really mind. I kind of use my solutions for their really worry about it. But in the end, they decided to say, yeah, provider is fine. Let's use that. So that's how it ended up.
You directly and say good job, or was it like, hey, you stole my idea? Or I was just kind of curious if there's any kind of back and forth. It must have been something, right?
I mean, it was me who reached out to them on a GitHub issue on their repository. And then after exchanging there a few times, we um, like we had met online to discuss more in depth about the different issues I had with their implementation and how I tried to solve them. Like I showcased them how provider works, and then they generally how the way provider worked was better. So they decided to just use that.
Yeah, I mean, the part I like about provider the most is that it's very, we were also talking about this before the show, right? Is that it's very kind of clear that, okay, this is where it is in the tree, and you can kind of see it, and you can move it up and down pending what you want to do. But I think what kind of really killed it for provider, or at least what I think one of the things that you wanted to fix when you start looking at Riverpod, was that if you wanted multiple providers of the same class, how can you solve this issue, right? This is something that you think was a good idea. And I think it makes sense. Maybe we can start talking about like that, like what was it that kind of started sparking your ideas about, maybe this could be better, or maybe this doesn't suit all the problems. I have another idea. Like, what was the thought process?
Um, it didn't at one specific turning point. It's more like over time I realized that provider had many issues like um, first, many people made issues about provider not found exceptions because somehow they're using build context doesn't have access to the provider, or how making two providers of the same. They're trying to read both individually. Over time, many people made different issues. But different problems that I straight up couldn't solve provider. Like I couldn't fix any of those because it's just not possible. It would have to work mechanism. Maybe try to do some teeny tiny for the having two providers of the same type. Navigator as it technically is the same issue, but it kind of tries to solve that by having an optional parameter on navigator.auth where you can set the root navigator or obtain the closest navigator on navigator.auth. So it's like a tiny workaround about. I don't think it really solves the problem. Like it's have three providers of the same time, and you want to obtain the other two. So it's not API, and I didn't really want to add those half-baked API because I think it will maybe potentially cause more problems than it's solving, and it's not quite intuitive. So I started searching for potential solutions. After many issues, I was trying to kind of like what I did with provider to fix a specific problem that people had. I tried to find a different API. Problems wouldn't exist. So now that I knew what the problems were, I experimented many different APIs over time, completely unrelated to providers, different things. I just trashed because they were just straight up not good enough. Like sometimes you're maybe solving one problem, but you're causing many other problems, so they're just not good enough to use. But that's after a lot of research, I found about API about global variables, even if these are not quite global, which I think is the best compromise for the problems that provider had. So that's how I figure out it's solving the problem. But then I was I knew when I found solutions that folks that are provider wouldn't quite be familiar with this and wouldn't say always like it. Like so I knew that I couldn't just do a version for provider with this and to make a separate package for it to let people try it, and maybe people would say, yeah, that's not worth provider, which some people said. Yeah, you're right. It's a big improvement. Let's yeah, so it's basically
it's quite a different API. Like, where did you get your inspiration for doing this kind of thing? Because it's like where it's kind of mentioned before, it's strange, but strange kind of negative. Let's just say it's not it's not intuitive based on like when you're working with Flutter, it's always trees, right? It's not really a tree thing, but it also is because you have this provider scope, which is I think the name of the widget where actually things are actually stored. So like it's very magical in the sense that it's not explicit, right? Maybe we can talk more about let's talk about the inspiration and maybe talk a little bit more about at a high level how everything kind of works. I think would be a good, at least for me, it'd be very good to understand.
My inspiration was I've been using React for a while, and in this context API where when you're defining, they have something similar to inherited widgets, but they're not using generic types. Instead, they're defining a global variable for their inherited widgets. It's the same as with Riverpod, where provider scope, and then you can access any of those providers defined in the application. you still have to insert the context, that they call it, inside.
But the difference is,
with their API, since they're defining a variable, they have type informations about what the result will be. They also don't have issues with two variables of the same type or other which is in general like the other has. So I figure out that's a good that looks like a good solution. As with this approach, you still have to insert all of your providers inside the widget tree. Like you're defining as a global variable, but you still have to insert it inside your widget tree. Maybe pass it to multi-provider or something like that, which is very tedious, especially considering now, so it's less obvious. Of that, and I searched for solutions to fix this problem. I didn't want people to define the provider. For trying better defense thing, I figure out I could provide a scope widget that kind of with lazy initialization. Like the way it works is it no longer supports purposefully no longer supports initializing a provider the first time your widget tree renders. Initialized the provider. And so providers are always initialized the first time you read the provider. I could I no longer need to know all the providers that exist in the application. I can deal with the initialization process only when the first time they are accessed, because then I would have directly what the provider is. I would know at that time, and then I would do maybe a map somewhere in which is basically what it's basically a map of provider and their state. That's basically how it works.
Scope because it is pretty interesting. Yeah, I still wish I could understand how things get inserted, right? So it must be doing something with that ref. It's just so hard for me to understand without seeing it explicit.
I think about it as it's that the map keys are the providers and the values are providers. And so when you're and the thing is that when you're trying to read the map, you use the put if absent method, doing the insertion like for you, so you don't have to do if the state created or otherwise read that for you. But other than that, it's quite similar to a map.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems pretty good. I'm kind of curious about like what is happening with Riverpod recently. I didn't look at the exact changes, but I did see a lot of people complaining that things are being broken recently. I guess you must be making some pretty big API changes that this is happening.
Yes. You want Riverpod? You more streamlined. Before we used to have many different syntax for reading a provider, which depended based on whether you were in a provider, whether you were widget, whether you use. So now anywhere, it's always the same syntax for reading. Makes learning provider and the API more. That is also a bit very. But hopefully, we made with team with working on Riverpod, we made a migration tool so that it's dealing with the migration for you, so that
Riverpod CLI,
and then you Riverpod migrate and to
the new syntax
for
for
you.
it.
So
even if it's a big breaking change,
the
the
migration cost is very low. It's basically done for you.
That's good. I didn't even know about that. Makes sense. Yeah, I think one of the also really the cool things about Riverpod is the compile time guarantees that you can say, okay, because basically it makes sense, right? You have 3 different states. You know, the data's there, the data's loading, or the data errored out. That's really quite clean. I can't imagine any other possible states that may happen. Like, where did that kind of idea come from? Because that's really a fantastic idea, and it's amazing that you can implement that.
It's related to free because I've always used types in Dart. And
so I phrase them
based on different inspiration I saw in the Dart community. I tried, and once again, it's this try
things. Many projects that never were quite released because they weren't usable.
but at some point I found the syntax for free. And so I think phrase this quite
solution
to union types. And I like it, and I think people like it too. And so I figure out I can use that directly inside Riverpod too.
State,
because that would make that would go that would be like, what's the word? Like it's in the same team as
solving,
because you know that Riverpod is provider not found exception and have a more type safe API. So I figured I could do the same thing with async and make it more compile safe. It's like and so it made sense here. So I did that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Now I want to kind of go back to Freezed. I love Freezed. I come from my background is usually a lot of functional programming, which of course is here at immutable data. So that's why Freeze really appeals to me. The only thing I don't like about Freeze is that I have to run the build runner, which is annoying. Although I did find out the watch command that makes life much easier, but still, that's definitely one of the worst things is running all that stuff. Like, is there a way that we can make this a little bit nicer in the future where it could just not have to rebuild everything every time I turn it on, or we kind of stuck with this?
That's actually a language proposal at the moment. Looking at instead of using build runner, they're looking at dealing with code generation directly inside the compiler.
Much better performance.
And so basically it is once this is available, freeze to
this new
function,
this new functionality, which is called metaprogramming.
Static metaprogramming. So that's the idea. So it's supposed to be
freeze
or adjacent
that class in general,
or maybe it's basically every
using code generation movements
will likely have to migrate
metaprogramming for
performance improvements.
I'm looking forward to that because that would make life much easier.
Yeah.
Let me also ask you another question, right? So the syntax, I did see, I tried looking this up myself. When you define constructors in Freeze, usually you have to use the const keyword. So what is a const in a constructor necessarily? I've seen const in the name of the constructor, but I didn't quite understand how that works and what that actually means.
Well, first of all, you don't really have to use the const keyword.
The const keyword is optional for,
but you can
to use.
So what this constructor
is,
it's for immutable classes only.
and
So what it does is
when a class is fully immutable, it to
instantiate the class at compilation time instead of at
runtime. Only if the parameters are known at compilation time too. So it's a number like a constant. So if you're typing 42, it's fine. But if you're using number and passing it, that won't work because that's a run. Strings works too, lists, all these things, and of course, other classes that are instantiated with the const keyword. And so when you're instantiating your class using this, since this class is
there's literally no way of changing
the content
in this situation. What the compiler
does
is
if you're trying to instantiate the this class with the exact same pattern into they will share
class instance
instead of creating
different
two separate classes, because since they're using the exact same parameter, the compiler can optimize that, so it takes less memory, which is neat.
In particular, like Flutter uses it a lot for widgets because widgets
are immutable, as you may know. Like the memory of
need, but it's not that big of a deal. But what Flutter does with it
is
a lot more
interesting, I think.
Say you're
instantiating a widget with a constant. That basically means that the instance of your widget will always be the same because of how what I explained before, where when
it's recursive, it will always have the same class instance because of this const keyword.
And so what this means is
Flutter will detect
that the widget instance didn't change, and so since it didn't change, it knows that it doesn't have to
UI associated to this widget
because it's immutable. So if nothing changed, there is no need to rebuild anything.
In this situation, it can lead to drastic performance improvement because you have to rebuild a lot less widgets than you would typically have to. Because
I remember when I looked at the freeze docs that they mentioned that you should use const, and at least it had it in the code. Maybe I need to look it up again, make sure I'm not losing my mind. It's optional. Okay.
Yeah.
But I understand that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's const factory, right? So
yes,
the strange thing is that it's const factory, but you can still pass in a runtime variable, right?
Yeah.
Variables, then you cannot use const here. Like
if you're specifying const factory, the only thing it does is declare that this class can be instantiated with.
There's our const too. But if the parameters aren't const, you won't be able to
instantiate it with the const.
Oh, I see. Okay, I understand. Got it. Okay. Yeah. So we did get a question from the audience. We actually have some people who are, like I said before we started the show, they were asking how come it hasn't started yet. Somebody asked, will Riverpod replace provider, meaning that will provider be removed from pub.dev?
First of all, we cannot remove packages from pub. Provider will not. That's just straight up impossible, and I don't think we should.
In general, I do think,
and I do hope that Riverpod will kind of replace provider. When I announced the Riverpod recently, I said that official recommendation now is if you're starting with a new, consider using Riverpod instead of provider. Google recommendation, it's mine. So recommending provider. In my opinion, you should avoid using if you can. Riverpod is definitely no better.
Of using provider is not
Riverpod. You
maybe try it.
I was just talking to Chris Sells a couple weeks ago, and yeah, he made it seem like no, provider is still what we recommend, and Riverpod we just don't see it. Maybe I don't. I'm just taking my. This is my understanding. So don't go find Chris and yell at him. But this is my understanding. Was like we don't see Riverpod at the state that we see provider in terms of like ease of use and understanding all these kind of things. And I think I can see that. And I think we also kind of mentioned that yeah, there's a little bit of a change of thought that needs to take place in order for this to happen. But it's interesting that you say that like you should probably just not even look at provider and just take a look right at Riverpod, which is super interesting.
From also, it will be easier to introduce provider, but it won't necessarily be easier to use. I think Riverpod makes development much easier than provider, especially with compile simplicity and all of that.
The problem with Riverpod
is the documentation is not in a good. It's more things than necessary to work, so it's a bit scary at the moment. When provider kind of like, I mean, technically provider has many classes and Riverpod, provider doesn't really. Provider is actually a quite bad.
I think it makes ironically
provider look.
the
Function is so much smaller than Riverpod.
Feel like it's easy to learn provider.
At least that's my understanding. I'll try to find solutions things that likely, and that in the long run, I think maybe the mindset will change.
I may be wrong,
but hopefully.
Find it like we're talking before the show. I have one project. So most of my projects are built using block, and that's using Flutter block. So that's using provider underneath the hood. So it makes a lot of sense for me. But yeah, I do run into the issue of like cannot find the block. Okay, it happens. And I agree. You know, I like the style of Riverpod in that terms that yeah, you can have it anywhere because you got the provider scope. You can put that on top of your app. You're ready to go. Where was I going with this one? I think, yeah, like you said, the documentation in terms of how to properly use this in production or how to properly use this is, yeah, maybe could be better. I think also the testing, maybe that one's probably something that's definitely lacking because, well, not a lot of people write automated tests, but I'm a little bit more into that than maybe others. And it does take some getting used to, like, because provider is very easy to understand. Okay, so I got this provider, I do an implements of that class. I could just swap it in. It's very clear, but it's also not like you said. It's not that much complicated. I mean, you wrap a provider scope, you do an override with, and you can pass in. It's basically the same thing, just different syntax. So you have to like wrap your mind around the syntax, which is really what's the most difficult part for me to wrap my mind around. But once you have that, then I think it's rather straightforward.
Yeah.
I think one of the irony with provider is that,
as I mentioned, there
provider is not solving. There are many issues that Riverpod solves the
provider. But
I think
that it's micropod
is in the sense because
I think many people are
the API.
The many different.
The fact that Riverpod is just a simple
Remi, whereas
Riverpod
has a complete website with multiple articles. like people that, especially with problems that provider is not solving, they may think, oh my god, there are so many things, what do I need to do, when actually
use provider, you would have issues.
but if you
Use Riverpod,
those issues are solved already, it's just people don't necessarily realize it.
I need to start doing more stuff with Riverpod to get used to it more. I feel like maybe I might be missing something.
Definitely,
not
not
that
that really easy, not the C1.0 of Riverpod. And it's definitely to do a rework of the documentation to be beginner friendly, because it's definitely not at the moment.
Difficult part is like, because the syntax has changed a couple of times where it's like, I forgot what the changes were, but it's something like you would say like dot, like provider dot, and then like state, and then it used to be like provider dot, like somehow it changed like when you would watch things. I can't remember what the changes were, but you probably know what I'm talking about, where like the attributes that you would call, they changed, and also some of them were different too. It's like if you're using state notified provider, it was like this, but if you're using provider, it's just like this. And then finally, I think he unified it to where they're acting the same. And
Yeah.
I think I also hit a stage where like I had to change because I upgraded Riverpod and like things changed.
Yeah, I mean,
change.
we made sure to review, but maybe people didn't necessarily always realize it. They provide documentation and all that. When
We
you
unified this,
the tool did
the migration
for you.
maybe
Maybe you didn't know that.
I did as a migration tool, so I usually just
Fine.
migrate by hand.
Yeah, I mean, if you're migrating by hand, I can.
but
we definitely made one on purpose because
It's not so bad because my apps are not that big, but at the same time, like I don't mind it to be, I don't mind to do that. It's fine, especially if it makes it better. And because it's compiled language, it's not that difficult to do because you can see all the errors. If it's a
Yeah.
runtime error, then I would get a little bit upset.
Yeah. Software Riverpod is, since it's compiled safe, sure it may be breaking,
but you will know that you didn't
migrate. You will know if you're still missing some breaking. JavaScript, for example, would be JavaScript horrible.
So let me just ask you, just kind of curious, what is your favorite package that you have worked on? Is it Riverpod?
Yeah.
I was hoping you're going to throw me a screwball and say something very strange, but you gave me the typical answer I was expecting, which I'm a little bit upset about, but it's okay.
I mean, it's a close match between Riverpod and Freeze. I think the package.
I think Freeze is definitely more
Both are solving
interesting.
different
You do a lot more interesting
Yeah.
stuff. Mhm.
I don't quite agree. I think Riverpod is doing many very, very interesting things. It's just
the documentation is initiated, it's not necessarily
making
interesting
things
things.
obvious. Like my favorite thing, ref.watch, which is unique to Riverpod. Like you won't find any provider, or you won't finding it block anywhere. But it's doing it's such a huge it's allowing such a huge simplification of your logic in some cases.
Which is something
that needs to be
very introduced.
So the documentation, I have a lot of work to do on the documentation on that area.
Well, I mean, Flutter block does have context.watch and context.select,
Yeah, but
which is kind of similar.
Yeah. I mean, provider has those, but that's not quite what I meant. You cannot use select inside a provider. So
you cannot really
easily combine providers. It's
Mm.
not really something you would typically do in provider or in block or in whatever. You don't really combine providers.
Yeah. Yeah, this is true. I understand what you're saying now. And I was actually kind of curious, like this, the watch stuff, is that just using like Marcus Dirty underneath or something? I didn't look into it, but I'm guessing it must be using
Yes,
some kind of dirty. Yeah, okay, that
that's
makes
funny.
sense.
So we have a discussion.
I know all your tricks now. I know all your tricks now.
I had actually during the DroidCon discussion. We were discussing about React Query, if you're familiar with it. And I was basically arguing that Riverpod is kind of React Query in Dart. They are still solving a similar problem, but they're trying to do the same thing. Riverpod is focusing a lot on declarative caching. But that's really not obvious.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more I want to ask at this moment because we went through all the major points that I really want to get to you. Yeah, I mean, is there anything you wanted to say or to mention before we kind of sign off for the day?
Think about it.
Any self-promotion or something?
Maybe not promotion, but if possible, I would some help for documentation, like as a general, because I know that as the author of provider and all sorts of things, I know how to use those things, but I don't have this view, and so and in general articles, and so I have a lot of issues and. Um, if possible, if you find something difficult, like if you think something that could you think could be improved, right? Suggest please raise an issue for it and keep it track of them. And since I focus now on your opinion will definitely be taken into consideration. So please feel free to reach out and try and help with the documentation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about what would it. For me, I like to know the deep as possible to really understand everything, but I think that may scare people away. So how do you make it approachable yet informative? It's going to be tricky for me too.
I think I should allow you to do both. The moment is mostly technical, and so it's most like it's explaining the concepts, but not necessarily on how to build an application and something that people. Yeah, a good documentation should definitely have both.
Okay. No, I think that's good. I may think about putting some use to it, but maybe I'm not the right person also to write this kind of stuff because I'm too far in the weeds, too deep down to do
I mean, it's
that.
fine. I think any command is generally useful. It's a random question. It's fine. It helps. Like if many people ask different questions, like if for example, if a common question comes up many time, maybe it's worth having kind of somewhere on the documentation that takes this exact explains the answer. So just it's fine, even if you don't like anything is fine.
I'd like to have more documentation of not using consumer widget, because not everybody uses that one. No, I was just looking through the reading provider, right? Because that was something I hung up before. I talked to you about that. And so reading provider, I'm just looking through the documentation, and you're always using the consumer widget. But if you're not using consumer widget, then this kind of docs may not make sense for you. If there's a way that you could flip back and forth between consumer widget and not using consumer widget, like on all these different blocks that you have, that might be kind of nice.
You like
you want to say.
Just normal stateless or stateful widgets. Like that was the part that hung up on me for a while. It took me a moment to find how to actually read the provider so I could use it in a project, was because I didn't know how to get the ref. And it wasn't so clear for me. If I use consumer widget, it's very clear because it's part of the build method.
That's why you have to use consumer widget. You cannot. You have to use consumer widget.
I thought, I mean, I obtained a ref somehow. Here, I got it from, no, not from a provider. I got it from somewhere. I don't remember how I did it anymore.
I mean,
I have to
you
look it up
could
again.
use
Well, I used the context to get it.
Yeah, you could use the widget called consumer widget, which is a builder.
Your reference
Returns a widget of your choice.
consumer widget anyway.
So
Yeah, I think what I did is I just used context read or something. I can't remember what I used to get what I need to get, because I didn't need to rebuild. I just needed to only call a function, and that was already using watch, I think, somewhere. I can't remember now. It's been a while, but yeah, I mean, I wish there was, that would be something I wish was in the docs, is more about how to do stuff if you're not using consumer widget or hook widget. I'm aware that you wrote those two and that you think they should be used together, but if you're not using it together, then it would be good to have. Because if you're just saying, let's use Riverpod, you should use Riverpod, but then you don't use consumer widget because you don't really know what is consumer widget, then that would be a hang up possibly, because all of your stuff is using consumer widget.
yeah, but
Because then you're putting you're making me add another package just to use it. Go ahead.
But the thing is, if you're using Riverpod, you have to use consumer widget. You cannot not use it.
This is your step.
I have to use consumer widget just for using this.
It is necessary to obtain the ref, and the ref is critical to reading provider.
Oh,
there's no way around
it. No, you could just use consumer, I think, right? If you want to get the ref.
Oh yeah, but widget is the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm looking at extends consumer widget versus just consumer, I think, which was what you're talking about.
Oh, you think you wanted the documentation to show consumer instead of consumer widget?
Exactly. That's what comes to my mind. Because I don't like to always add in these special widgets, because like if I bring a new person onto the team and they haven't used Riverpod before, they probably don't know what is consumer widget. They probably don't know all like hook widget. I'm aware that they're popular. I'm aware that they give a lot of niceties to them. But if you have only been using provider, let's just say, right? Let's just say they've only been using provider for the longest time. I'm using Riverpod. Then they have more things to pick up rather than just the one, right? So it's kind of like there's a barrier that, okay, if I have to use this one, now I have to add another package on top. That's just kind of building up to more things that I think is too much, right? But maybe I'm making this into drama, but that's just kind of what comes to my mind.
That's fair if you think that's too much. But I really don't think that it's an optional step. Like, I don't think the documentation can just not mention. For me, it's you cannot do without it. If the documentation mention consumer instead of consumer widget, I think the point of because you're supposed to use consumer widgets. So if people start using consumer instead, they wouldn't use the correct syntax, if you know what I mean. But I mean, I'll see what I can do about it. I'll think about it.
I'm just looking at my project. So like I said, I only have one project with Riverpod, and I'm using consumer instead of using consumer widget, extending consumer widget. So
Oh,
that's why. Mhm.
I see. Interesting. And so this is funny.
And it's just because like I wanted to onboard people to this project, but I feel if I extend consumer widget, then that may make them feel more confused because it's not in simple Flutter tutorials, right? Most of them, like you said, they maybe use provider or even just normal stateful widgets.
I wish I could do without it. There's definitely something like I wish I could fix and have some form of functionalities inside widgets that could allow implementing Riverpod. That would be great. I don't think I wish.
Definitely give you. I can write all your examples using that. It's not difficult for me.
No, I mean that's not quite what I meant. I meant I wish I could run mirror widget and still allow doing what it's supposed to do. Because I wish I could. Yeah. What's this?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, documentation is not simple, right? So
Yeah.
good thing is this is your problem, not mine. So I wish you good luck. No, if I come up with some ideas, I mean, I'll spit them out to you. But I feel like maybe I won't be able to do it. Yeah, I mean,
anyone
okay.
can have really. Anyone can have local to your audience, obviously. Like if someone listening here has some ideas, I'm really open to anything.
Okay, so you guys heard it. If you want to help out Riverpod because it's one of your favorite state management solutions, definitely get out there and try to help out with the docs. Documentation is not easy. Everybody wants to write code, but nobody wants to write docs. But everybody
Yeah.
wants to read the docs. Everybody wants to read the docs. Nobody wants to write them. Okay. Okay. Again, thank you for your time. We went a little bit over time, but I'm glad you can give me so much of your time again. I feel I keep saying that word over and over again. Yeah, hopefully we can have you back on here again when you got some more changes come up to Riverpod. I'm sure there's going to be maybe, I don't know, mountain pod or something coming up soon. I'm guessing you're gonna have another idea. Maybe.
No.
No, this is the end of your
No.
inspiration. This is the end of your inspiration.
That want to do, but they're not
Okay.
involving making a new package. Well, not quite making a new package. The ideas I currently have are for dev things like those. So they're complementary. They're not a real. I don't have to depreciate from it. They're more combined.
Okay, so more tooling. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, definitely you can reach out if you want to kind of introduce any of your new products and let us know what's going on because I haven't met a bad package from you so far. So, are you sick too? I'm also sick. Maybe did you get me sick?
I don't think so. I don't think that's how it works.
Okay. Yeah, well, I hope you get better. I got my, if you see over here, is my baggie of medicine I gotta take.
Thank you.
So
I hope you get better too.
I hope everybody stays safe, but it's never gonna last, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate every second of your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It's nighttime for me and they're ready for bed, so I'll catch you again in the future. Thanks.